We're at the top of the hour, so I'll go ahead and get us started. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. My name is Dr. Rebecca Mears. I'm a member of the VIN Foundation Student Debt Education team. Really excited to be here with you this evening or morning, depending on where you are. We've got a lot of really great information to share with you. I also wanted to give huge shout outs and thank yous to both SAVMA and VBMA for helping us to promote and put on this event. It's been a huge undertaking. So thank you all so much. I wanted to turn it over to both Kayla and Tony so that they can say hello and any details that you want to share.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tony. I am the 2025 VBMA treasurer. So for all my VBMA people out there, thanks for coming. We are giving BCP credit. This will be one Category 4 credit or Category C credit for you guys, since we got that new system. You have to log into my VBMA, and then click on the Join Meetings tab, and you should see it right on the top. Just click Attend. And then I'm going to send a link in the chat. It's to a form just so that way we can track your progress and just show that you've been here the whole time. You're just going to write some stuff down just to show that you learned something. And then we should be good to go from there. But thank you guys for coming.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kayla. I'm the National SAVMA Veterinary Economics Officer. Just wanted to say thank you all so much for coming, and a huge thank you to VIN and VBMA for partnering with us for this. Um, as some of you may know, VIN does their big Borrow Better challenge every time around this year. And so we wanted to send this out to you guys to kind of increase awareness about the different changes and options with a lot of things changing for student loans. So later on, I'll be sending a Google form in the chat just to kind of make sure all of our ducks are in a row there. But thank you again to everyone at VIN for organizing this and everything. You're amazing. And I'll send it back to Dr. Mears.
Thank you so much to you both. Yeah, so really excited. A couple of housekeeping things before we get kicked off here. We do have the chat, which we try to keep for any sort of like technical issues or SAVMA and VBMA. We'll share some links and things there as well. Otherwise, we try to put all of the questions throughout the presentation in the Q&A. That allows you to ask questions anonymously, and you can also upvote questions there. And so that just helps us to make sure that we're getting the most pressing questions, the most common questions asked live. I'll also be working to answer questions in the background, and we're joined by Jordan Ben-Shia in the background as well, who will be helping out. She's the executive director for the VIN Foundation. So we've got a whole team here to help out and try and answer as many questions as we possibly can. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Tony Bartels so he can get into the real fun part of this whole conversation.
Indeed. Well, thanks everyone, and thanks for joining. And thanks to all of you who actually submitted a post in the Borrow Better Challenge thread. I'll show you that too. Those are going to be what makes you eligible for the prize drawings we'll do along the presentation tonight, in addition to covering a lot of the questions and concerns I saw come in the registration, as well as in the Borrow Better message board thread. When it comes to borrowing and repayment. I saw a lot of questions about repayment as well. We're going to focus mostly on borrowing, although we will touch upon repayment a little bit towards the end. There are some specific differences, especially if you're approaching graduation. So if you're going to be graduating in 2026, repayment is going to look a little bit different for you than it will for all of your colleagues who are graduating behind you. So 2027 and beyond. So those are some of the differences that we'll need to get into, but we're going to focus mostly on borrowing and some of the changes that are coming up and whether or not you might be affected by them. So with that, I think I have my first poll, which is, when will you graduate from veterinary school? I think I can launch this guy. All right, that was an easy one. We got most of the people participated here. And just another few seconds. So it looks like most of you are first years, which is great because that's where some of the borrowing, depending on what your circumstances will be, some of the borrowing changes might impact you. So we'll make sure to differentiate between those circumstances. And for those of you that are graduating in 2026, again, repayment is going to look a little bit different for you than it will everybody that's graduating after 2026. So we'll talk about some of those differences as we work our way through the presentation tonight. All right. So the Borrow Better Challenge, this is the second annual one, and essentially what we do is we kind of borrowed from the clinical case challenges that the student team puts on for students to get familiar with VIN and how to find information on VIN and apply it to those complex clinical cases that you're going to be seeing not too shortly, or some of you may already be seeing them if you're on clinics. So what we did is we had you use some of the VIN Foundation Student Debt Center tools and post what you find in the student debt message board area. So checking on your student loans, getting you familiar with where your student loan details live on studentaid.gov, uploading that information into the VIN Foundation My Student Loans tool, and then running an in-school loan estimation, posting that result along with your answer to the 5 questions that we asked you to answer along with what you saw in your in-school loan estimation. So I'll take you over just to show you what that looked like if that wasn't something that you participated in. But this is the message boards here. Every veterinary student has free access to VIN. So if you haven't activated your VIN membership yet, I would highly encourage you to do so at VIN.com. Every student has free access to VIN, and then whether or not you maintain that VIN access after school, you'll always have access to the student debt message board area. So if you have questions about your student loans, or you ask those questions during school, and then you go on after school to not be a VIN member, you could still post questions in there and research some of those student loan questions that we see our colleagues posting about in the message boards. So this is all trying to get you familiar with, how to be curious about your student loans, understand what's happening, and then ultimately how to get help, right? So everybody's situation is a little bit different. It does require us to get into some personal nitty-gritty, and that's where the message boards come in handy, right? So, posting where you are in your program and sharing an in-school loan estimation link, as well as uploading your file to the student debt message board area, can help us know more about your student loan details, which better then helps Dr. Mears and I answer those questions that you have about your student loan. So this is what the thread looks like. So a lot of people who are posting their Borrow Better Challenge entries, so links to their in-school loan estimations and answers to the questions. People that were surprised maybe by the amount of interest that accrues, people that were not surprised. So there was a number of posts in here. There was probably 3 dozen, if not more. So those are all the people that will be eligible to win the prizes tonight. And then we'll talk about some of the themes that came up in the Borrow Better Challenge, as well as some of the other changes that are happening to student loans in the background. All right, so yeah, borrowing and repayment are changing, and pretty significantly. Now, some of you are going to notice that, others of you will not. It really depends upon where you are in the process here. But the fact that you're already in veterinary school makes it more likely than not that you're not going to be affected by the borrowing changes, but you probably will be affected by the repayment changes unless you're graduating in 2026, right? So we're kind of in this transition phase between the borrowing and repayments, and it really depends upon where you are in the process to know which of those changes are going to maybe impact you. So prize drawings, these are going to be kind of the, what we do, looking for these little icons. We'll stop along the way, and those of you that submitted those Borrow Better Challenge entries will be eligible to receive those prizes. Why do I do this? Because I've got a boatload of student debt. Dr. Mears has a boatload of student debt, right? So it helps to know what this system does and works and how it affects different people. This is my scenario, right? I'm married to a veterinarian. I'm a veterinarian myself, and together we have more than $400,000 of student debt that is largely from veterinary school. And we've been in repayment for more than a decade, and we've seen the system change significantly over that 10-year plus period, right? So if you don't do anything with your student loans after you graduate, they put you in what's called a standard plan. So in this, for soon to be grads, it would be a standard 10-year plan. So whatever your student loan balance is and the interest rate that calculates what that payment would be to extinguish that balance in 10 years or less, that's what determines your minimum monthly payment. For most of us that have six-figure student loan debt, that standard 10-year plan payment is just too high, especially as you're getting started. So that's where the income-driven plans can come in really handy. And as the name implies, the payments are a function of your income. So we started out with a plan called IBR, or income-based repayment. Then there was a new one that came online called Revised Pay As You Earn. That was a little better deal. And then the pandemic hit. They turned off student loan repayment. They turned interest off. They still gave us credit towards our total amount of time that we're required to be in repayment. And then as they turned the system back on, they changed repay to a plan that was called SAVE, or Saving on a Valuable Education. And this is the one that ended up getting tied up in the federal court system, and is not long for this world any longer, right? So everybody that was using SAVE before got put into a forbearance. That's currently where our loans are. For a while, that forbearance was non-interest bearing, but they just turned the interest back on in August. And this is where some of the changes are taking effect, some of the changes that came through in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that was passed this past summer. So we're currently sitting tight. We haven't decided exactly where we're going to go yet. We don't have to make any payments, although we are accruing interest. So chances are we'll make a decision on what to do with those loans in the not so distant future, right? But repayment is a total mess right now. So I'm not terribly eager to throw my hat in that ring if I don't have to. I want to see some of those kinks get worked out first, and hopefully we'll have a little more clarity on what things are going to look like going forward. But we are planning and saving for what's called student loan forgiveness. So what happens in these income-driven plans is you make payments based on your income for a specified period of time, right? Depending on the plan that you're able to use. And once you hit that maximum repayment time that that plan allows, if you still have a balance remaining, that remaining balance is forgiven. And you may have to pay tax on that forgiven balance. So we're planning as if we're going to hit forgiveness somewhere between 7 and 13 years from now, depending on how they count our forgiveness credit. And we're planning to pay that tax on what our anticipated balance forgiven would be. So the good news for us is we already met our estimated tax goal. So we just need to adjust it up or down a little bit based on what we think that tax might be as we get a little bit closer to it. And then, accommodate for changes, right? Changes will happen. We've seen nothing but changes happen to this system. It'd be nice if it stays stable for some period of time, but at least since probably 2012, it's been changing pretty regularly, right? So even though we just had a new legislative package that changed the whole system again, there's a chance that it's probably going to change maybe before some of you graduate, maybe shortly after that, but probably things will change, right? If passes any prologue, we're going to see additional changes to this system in the coming years. So we'll have to understand how some of these things work and adapt appropriately. That's where the message boards really come in, right? Just like complex clinical cases, VIN is great for getting some feedback from colleagues that might have some experience in complex clinical cases that you're trying to treat. As student loan system is changing around you, you can ask questions. You can research what other people are doing and also post your own questions as they pertain to your specific circumstances. So hopefully that Borrow Better Challenge helps you to get familiar with the boards and understand how you can post on there and get some feedback from those of us that do stay plugged into all of these various changes. So let's dive in and talk about the student loan physical exam. So many of you that did the Borrow Better Challenge, or if you grabbed your file and uploaded it into the My Student Loans tool, you're already getting familiar with the student loan physical exam process. But most of you have direct unsubsidized loans or direct Grad Plus loans. And some of you may even have some direct subsidized loans from undergrad. Some of you may even have health profession student loans or loans for disadvantaged students. These are all types of federal student loans that we commonly see for veterinary school. The predominant type are these direct unsubsidized loans, these direct grad plus loans, once you hit the limits on the unsubsidized variety. If you're lucky enough to get these health profession student loans or loans for disadvantaged students, these can really be helpful during school because they don't accrue interest, whereas these do. Right, so any amount that you can get in these health profession student loans or loans for disadvantaged students will help to decrease the amount of interest that results from these types of loans, or maybe even reduce the amount of loan that you need to take in one of these more expensive categories. Private loans are anything that doesn't fall into any of these categories, right? So they usually have a bank name associated with them, so they're Discover or Wells Fargo or Bank of America or Sallie Mae. Those are all banks that offer private loans and private student loans. You can still get both direct unsubsidized and grad plus loans. There is in the provision, and we'll talk about that in just a second in the recent changes, there is a sort of grandfathering that will happen for those of you that have started a program and have started borrowing. The gap becomes, whether or not you started borrowing, right? And that's going to be one of the areas that we focus on here in just a minute. So in order to know what type of loans you have, we have to participate in the Department of Education system, which is available at studentaid.gov. So this is also where FAFSA lives and where you apply for your federal student aid. There's a lot of updates, so you can see some of the changes that have taken place as a result of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. But here I'm going to log in, and I'll show you what my student loan balance looks like. But I would also encourage you to kind of follow along if you didn't do this as part of the exercise for the Borrow Better Challenge. They give you the code pretty quickly. Should get that here just a second. There it is. Lots of scary language. All right, so we get dumped into the dashboard on the studentaid.gov site. Here's your link to your FAFSA form when you need to fill that out again. This kind of gives me a high-level overview of my remaining student loan balance. I can see my loan servicer, but this isn't really enough information for me to make any decisions. It's kind of just a high-level summary. So I'm going to hit this View Details button here, and that will take me to this next page, this My Aid page, and this is the button I'm looking for. So the Download My Aid Data, this is what gives me my complete history, if you will, of my interaction with the higher education system. So if I had loans from undergrad, they'll be in here. My loans that I just received for veterinary school, they'll be in here. If I'm approaching the end of veterinary school, all of that will be in there, right? And all of those details are going to be really relevant in helping you understand not only which repayment options you're going to be eligible for, but how to approach repayment in general, just based on the amount of the student debt that you have. So grab that student aid file, save it to your device, and then we're going to head over to the VIN Foundation Student Debt Center and the My Student Loans tool. All right, and this is where I'm going to show you some examples tonight and what that looks like and how you can generate that in-school loan estimation and then eventually send that information over to the loan repayment simulator. So there's a variety of tools on here that are designed specifically for pre-veterinary students, and veterinarians who have student loans. Right now, anybody who has attended graduate or professional school can use these tools. The way that we have it set up is catered towards how federal student loans work for graduate and professional school programs. But again, it's designed specifically for veterinarians, veterinary students, and pre-veterinary students. If you're not logged into VIN already, it'll ask you to do so, right? And in order to be able to upload your file, here, let me log out and I'll show you what it looks like there, and I'll come back. So if I go back to the VIN Foundation Student Debt Center, it'll say visitor, right? And if I go to the My Student Loans page, it'll ask you to log in here, right? And again, because you guys are all veterinary students, you have free access to VIN. You're going to want to join VIN through vin.com. And then once you have that username and password, you can log in, right? So you just use your VIN username and password. It'll log you in, it'll know your profile here, and you can see I've got some files that I've uploaded. It'll save all of that progress for you. So now that I can upload my student aid data file, I'm going to do that. I'm going to hit this upload button. I've got some demos here. So here is a first-year student at Illinois who has received $10,500 in student loans so far, right? So we've just got that one loan, right? So this one loan that they received a little over a month ago, right? And this implies to me that they'll probably receive an equal amount next semester for this same direct unsubsidized loan type, right? So that is the single loan in this particular portfolio. You may see more, right? So if you've got loans from undergrad, you may see some other loan types that are in there. If you borrowed more than this, you may see both direct unsubsidized loans and direct grad plus loans in there. The one thing you won't find in your file is your health profession student loan or loan for disadvantaged students. So those you can add manually, right? So if we knew that this person had, let's say they received, I don't know, 7,500 in health profession student loans for this semester, we could add those. Those are generally those serviced by your school or maybe a company called Heartland ECSI. You can add that information if you know it. And all those loans are at 5%, and we can add them into that My Student Loans tool. So we have that additional accounting, and we can see kind of how these things are different and what's going on there, right? So this helps me get that initial overview of where I currently stand. And then the Borrow Better Challenge part of things had you sending this information over to the in-school loan estimator, right? So if I come back to my example, I'm going to send this over to the in-school loan estimator. It's going to bring over all of the information it can find, right? So if it finds your school name, it'll bring that over. Your program start date, it'll make some assumptions about when you're graduating. You can update that if you know what that graduation date is specifically. And then we may need to adjust this remaining years to borrow, right? Because if we already received our portion of our loan for that first semester, this is all going to be accounted for in that particular estimation. So I technically only have 3 years remaining to borrow because I've already received my loan for this first semester. I'll probably receive that equivalent amount the second semester. So that year is already accounted for. So I'll switch that to 3 years, and then here's where I can start to tweak that estimate. In this case, this was a non-resident at Illinois. I'm gonna just hit that button to try to get me in the ballpark. This data isn't quite up to date. So the actual total cost of attendance for a non-resident at University of Illinois right now is closer to 84,000. So I can update that to reflect what that actual cost of attendance is, and then update my loan amounts. Interest rates, we'll talk about what we can expect those interest rates to be going forward. And it'll break down the differences between your direct unsubsidized loans and grad plus loans. So if I hit the generate loan details here, this is going to give me kind of that ballpark estimate of what I can expect my graduation balance to be. And that's where we were asking you questions. Do you expect this to be higher, lower, about the same as what you were thinking? How can you maybe reduce some of these amounts or reduce the amount of interest that accrues, right? So this is the ugly side effect of borrowing for something like veterinary school, is that you can get all of the money that you need, but the more that you borrow, the more interest accrues. And interest for many of you is going to be equal to or even more than an additional year's worth of interest or tuition. So anything you can do to borrow less or find a way to incorporate some of those health profession student loans will reduce the amount of interest that accrues during school. So, and if that was the case, if I expected to get a little bit more, maybe in health profession student loans each year, right, I can update that. I would have to do a little bit of manual entry until we, get that tied together a little bit better. But in this case, we might, knock this down to accommodate those additional health profession student loans that we might have. And we can rerun that estimate, and we would have a lower amount of interest that accrues and a lower total balance at graduation. So those are just some of the ways that you can, game plan out what your graduation balance will be if you're able to get some different loan types or scholarships, or have some personal funding that you can add to the mix to reduce some of the amounts ideally that fall into the more expensive category, like the Grad Plus loans. And then eventually you can send that information over to the loan repayment simulators if you want to see what repayment looks like, right? So once I'm pretty happy with my estimate, then I can send that information over to the loan repayment simulator and start filling in my post-graduation plans. Those of you that are knocking on the door of graduation or approaching that, you can send those information over to the simulator and start filling in that income information and see what repayment might look like for you. All right, so what's changing? It really depends, right? For those of you that are already enrolled and in school as well as borrowing, so if you received a loan for this semester, then you're pretty much grandfathered into the existing rules as long as you're completing your program by 2029. Right now, I saw a few of you in that initial poll indicated that you're going to graduate in 2030, right? So if that maybe you're a pre-vet student that you found your way in here, that's great. If not, maybe you're in a 5-year program that's outside the U.S. That could get a little complicated, right? Because we don't, the way the law is written currently is that you can be grandfathered under the current borrowing rules for up to 3 more years, right after 2026. So, right now you've already borrowed for your first year. Your first year, most veterinary programs in the US are 4-year programs. So you would have a maximum of 3 years remaining anyway, right? So you should be able to satisfy the amounts that you need under the existing borrowing rules. If you're beyond that, or you don't fall into that category, then it might get a little bit more complicated as you get for that final year that is beyond that 2029 to get through veterinary school. One of the other issues that we've seen recently is that maybe you've started veterinary school, let's say your first year, and you have a situation that doesn't require you to borrow for the first year, right? So maybe you can pay out of pocket, or you received a scholarship, or some other reason why you don't have to take a loan for this particular year. If you start borrowing after July 1st of 2026, even though you're already enrolled in school, then you're going to be subject to the new borrowing limits and rules, right? So that's where we have seen a number of schools and planners, and even, I'll throw myself in that mix, recommending that even if you don't necessarily need to take a loan this year, that you probably want to, just to make sure that you're able to borrow under the existing rules, since they're more flexible than the rules that are going to be starting for people who are taking their first loan after July 1st of 2026. Right, and that would apply to you if you, let's say you're a first-year student, don't need a student loan this semester or next semester, but you come back next fall as a second year, and it's going to be, August, September that you're taking your first loan. Well, now you're going to be subject to the new borrowing limits, right? So it could make sense for you to take a loan, even if you don't technically need it. If you filled out FAFSA and you just declined all of the awarded amounts, it may make sense for you to take a small amount so you can continue borrowing under the existing rules. So that's where my second poll comes into play here. So how many of you may receive your first federal student loan after July 1st of 2026?
While everyone's answering that, we've got a couple of questions here in the Q&A. Our top upvoted question right now is there a way we don't accrue interest while being a grad student or at vet school?
Oh, well, not an easy way. There are some students who are able to fund their entire education through health profession student loans or loans for disadvantaged students. If that's you, then great, right? You won't accrue any interest, right? But that's really uncommon, and requires you to not need very much funding at all, right? For most of us, the cost of attendance for veterinary school is high enough where you're either going to need money beyond what you can get in health profession student loans or loans for disadvantaged students, um, which means you're going to end up taking direct unsubsidized loans or direct grad plus loans, and all of those accrue interest during school. So it's not it's usually, I mean, I can count on one hand the people that we meet each year who are able to get through veterinary school using only health profession student loans and loans for disadvantaged students. So maybe a few of you are here that are lucky enough to be in that category, but probably not, right? So probably you're going to end up tapping into those direct unsubsidized loans or grad plus loans, which means you're going to accrue interest during school. So your goal is to try to minimize the amount that you borrow in those categories, particularly the higher interest rate categories, so you reduce the amount of interest that accrues during school. All right, so
As a,
here's, oh, go ahead.
as a follow up to that, because it was related,
Yeah.
can anyone apply for HPSL, or are there specific requirements?
Yeah, so if your school offers them, first requirement is your school offers them, right? And if they do, then they're going to have an application process for you. It's not FAFSA, right? So it's an additional application. It is a need-based loan, so you will be required to put your family's financial information in there, right? So unlike the direct loans that you receive for veterinary school through FAFSA, you're considered to be independent from your family, no matter how they claim you on your taxes or on their taxes. Once you get to professional school, FAFSA doesn't care whether you're still a dependent of your parents or not. They're going to consider you independent for purposes of federal student loans. Health profession student loans and loans for disadvantaged students work a little bit differently. So your school will have a separate application that will require some kind of family financial information so they can use that need-based analysis to determine whether or not you qualify or how much you should receive. And it's kind of a relative need, right? So anybody, even if you're, one of Elon Musk's many children, I would still encourage you to apply for the health profession student loan, right? Because if nobody else applies for it, you still may get it, right? So it's kind of a availability thing. How big is the pot? How many people applied? And how much do you get? Right. So it's always worth throwing your hat in the ring, because those are some of the only sources of subsidized loans, meaning they don't accrue interest during veterinary school, that you can get. And that's very helpful in terms of reducing the amount of interest that accrues. So it does look like a few of you are potentially not going to need a loan until after July 1st of 2026. I would still encourage you to fill out FAFSA for this year. Even if you can't take out a loan for this semester, you can probably take one out for next semester, but you probably should still be able to take, since we're early enough in the year, you probably should still be able to get loans or an award for the first semester. If you want to wait and not take out a loan until the next semester, so you reduce the amount of interest that accrues, as long as you receive a loan before July 1st of 2026, then you should be grandfathered in to the current borrowing rules, right? And that's going to be really important, because the current borrowing rules set limits on how they're going to phase out or eliminate the grad plus loans altogether. Right. So if you don't receive a loan this year and your first loan is you're seeking after July 1st of 2026, you won't be able to get grad plus loans, which means you'll be limited to $50,000 in direct unsubsidized loans. And if your program is going to cost more than that before you graduate, then you're going to be scrambling to put together a combination of direct unsubsidized loans and some kind of private loan beyond that $50,000 limit to help you satisfy those remaining costs. Right now, if you're in a program that is lower cost, or it's an in-state and it's less than $50,000, that is going to be your need to pay for tuition fees and living expenses to get through school, then that probably doesn't matter all that much. right? But if you're at a private school or you're attending as a non-resident, chances are you're gonna need to piece together loans that include not only direct federal loans, but private loans, if that first loan you receive is after July 1st of next year. One of the other side effects of the changes is that if you do receive a loan after July 1st of 2026, which most of you will, right, except those of you that are graduating in 2026, you're going to be limited to only the new repayment assistance plan. So the new repayment assistance plan is going to be the only income-driven option that is available to borrowers who received a loan after July 1st of 2026. Right. So again, if you're anyone who isn't graduating in 2026, you're probably going to be borrowing a loan after July 1st of 2026, which means you're going to be limited to the repayment assistance plan or a standard plan with a 25-year maximum repayment period. So in some ways, your repayment gets simpler. However, while this new RAP plan, as it's called, does have some nice features, the fact that it requires 30 years to reach forgiveness is not so great. So that's kind of the new repayment reality for those of you that are not graduating after, or those of you that are graduating after 2026. All right, any questions on the changes in terms of where you might fall before we move more into student loan interest?
I see a question here. If we were to take out a small loan before the July 26th deadline, is there a minimum amount that can be taken out?
Yeah, there's no minimum amount. Try to keep it as small as possible. There's nothing in the law that says you have to take some amount. It just says that you have to be enrolled in a program and received a direct loan before, July 1st of 2026. So keep it small, right? I mean, and one of the other things that, that has kind of, as these things tend to take a life of their own on because we don't have very definitive guidance. There's people that are saying, well, you got to figure out a way to get a Grad Plus loan. And if you want to still continue to get Grad Plus loans, and maybe I don't, that's not how I read the new law. But I know that there are people out there recommending that you do try to take a Grad Plus loan. But the problem with that is not everybody's eligible for Grad Plus loans, right? If you don't need an amount that exceeds the current direct unsubsidized limits, then you might not be able to get a Grad Plus loan. And that's one of the reasons why I don't think the new law requires you to take a direct Grad Plus loan in order to continue to receive Grad Plus loans. But I certainly wouldn't fault anybody for taking a small amount of Grad Plus loans if they're eligible for it, just to make sure that they're eligible, right? So I wish I could give you a more definitive answer on that one. This is something that we're all going to kind of learn together as the system changes next fall. But in order to put yourself in a more optimal position, I would encourage you to take some amount of direct loans this year, at least before the July 1st of 2026, in order to make sure that you're not that you can continue borrowing under the existing rules rather than being subject to the new rules that have the limits on it. All right, so student loan interest. Let's talk a little bit about that. There was a lot of questions about how we can limit interest and why isn't so much, and how do we try to minimize the amount that accrues during school. So these are the interest rates on your current loans, right? So again, most of you are in the direct unsubsidized category. If you need more, these are the current limits for the direct unsubsidized loans for a 9-month academic year, which applies to most of you unless you're maybe in your 3rd or 4th year, or maybe a 2nd year at Virginia, Maryland. It's $40,500. Anything you need above that falls into the Grad Plus category, right? Now, the Grad Plus category, they're always 1% higher than the direct unsubsidized loans. They also have higher fees. So these are the most expensive loan types. to the extent that you can minimize how much you receive in direct grad plus loans, go for it, right? Don't avoid them altogether, you know, and put yourself in a precarious financial position. If you need them, take them, right? But if you are able to reduce any type of federal student loan, this is the one you want to reduce first, right? Because they are the most expensive, they will accrue the most interest, they have the highest fees. So, but they are eligible for the income-driven repayment options, right? So that's a good thing. They are eligible for public service loan forgiveness, right? So you don't want to, you know, trade those out for a non-federal student loan, right? Because the non-federal student loans aren't eligible for these things that do make repayment easier when you graduate, right? But we do want to try to minimize how much we do fall into that grad plus category. All right, next poll. Do you think your student loan interest rates will be higher or lower or the same next year? All right, I see a lot of pessimists. All right, so chances are, well, now we won't know this for a little while, but so the interest rates, your interest rates on your federal student loans are fixed, right? So the loans that you receive this academic year will have that 7.94 or 8.94, depending on the loan type, for the life of those loans that you received. However, each year around May, towards the end of May, depending on what the 10-year treasury yield is, will determine what your student loan interest rates are for the following academic year. Right, so next May of 2026, we'll know what those interest rates are that will set the fixed interest rates for direct unsubsidized and grad plus loans for that 2026-2027 academic year, right? As of right now, if they were to be set by the 10-year treasury yield, this would be about a quarter point lower, right? So about 7.75 when I looked and did the math today, right? Which means these would be 8.75. So chances are those interest rates will be lower on your student loans for the next academic year. Not too much lower, but thankfully lower, right? And these are actually lower than they were last year, right? So we kind of are on a decline when it comes to student loan interest rates. Hopefully that trend will continue for those of you that are in school. So by the time you get to fourth year, those interest rates may even be lower, right? And we can use that information in the in-school loan estimator, right, to see how that changes our estimate, right? So let's see, this was 33,538. Let's say this is 7.75. Then we'll keep being a little optimistic. Maybe it'll tick down 0.25% each year. And we'll generate those loan details without changing the amount. Oh, I broke it. Great. Let's see if I can figure out what happened there. Uh-oh. Of course, Murphy's Law. If it can break while you're demonstrating, it will. Interesting. All right. Well, theoretically, you should be able to change the interest rates. I'm not sure why it's not changing right now. We'll have to revisit that. Maybe I added too many decimal points. Let's try that. See if that works. Oh, it's really angry at me.
Here, we'll give Dr. Bartels a moment to see what's going on with the in-school loan estimator while we draw some prizes.
Yeah, let's do that.
Distraction.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll make the tool
Right.
work.
Yeah, go for it. Please draw some please draw some prize winners.
I think Jordan's got our wheel of names so that we can do some prize draws.
Okay, what do we want to draw for first?
Dealer's choice. Go for it.
Dealer's choice. Okay, let's start with why don't we go with the crowd's favorite DoorDash gift cards? So we'll start with one $25 one. Nathan M. All right. And then let's do a $20 one. Hope you can all hear the fun clicking. It's very exciting. So close. Okay, Christian A. Oh my gosh.
I didn't see the wheel of names on my screen. Does everybody else see that? Sorry if
Yeah, Zoom got weird where you have to like switch over to it if you're
Okay.
sharing your screen. You
Okay.
know, these updates.
Okay,
you
and
know,
then we'll
dude.
do one $15 one. My gosh. Okay. Caden S. Okay, wonderful. Those are our first three. Fantastic. All right, I will stop sharing. Tony, it's back to you.
Okay, great. Do you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Well, when I redid what I was doing before, it did work. I'm not sure why that previous bug popped up, but by just changing the interest rates and lowering them a little bit, again, the previous unpaid interest, I believe, was during the school was closer to that $34,000 range. So it saves you a couple $1,000s of interest, but just by changing those interest rates slightly over the course of this remaining 3 years that this particular person has to borrow, right? So that's another way that we can kind of chip away at what that graduation balance projection is expected to be. All right, and then this is more of a chat poll. So one of the questions that came up a lot, or comments that came up a lot in the Borrow Better Challenge as well as in registration, was paying interest while you're in school, right? So like this comment here says, I'm able to pay off some of the interest as I go. Should I be trying to pay off the interest while I'm still in school? I have some money in savings that I could do this in the chat in some of the pros and cons of making payments during school, and we'll see what we can learn here. And if you put a little plus in front of it, we'll assume that's a pro, and if you put a little minus in front of it, we'll assume that's a con if we can't figure it out naturally. But what do you think some of the pros and cons are of paying interest during school?
Well, we give everybody an answer, a moment to answer that. There had been a question. You've got the direct unsubsidized loan caps on the screen there. There was a question about does any of this work differently for schools abroad, or can I take student loans out the same way I would in the States? So I figured this might be a good opportunity to talk about that one.
Yeah, so direct unsubsidized loans have different limits if you're attending a school outside of the US. So this is the limit for schools within the US. You could subtract $20,000 from each of these numbers if you're attending a school outside of the US. Right, so the schools outside of the U.S. do not have the expanded direct unsubsidized limit for programs that are considered to be health profession programs like veterinary school. So you hit the direct unsubsidized limit faster at those foreign veterinary schools, which means more of your loans end up in that Grad Plus category. Right, so the Grad Plus loans are unlimited, right? So up to the cost of attendance. It makes them easy to get and easy to pay for any program at any price. But that's some of the things that are changing, right? That was one of the reasons why the big beautiful bill made the changes it did, is that we were starting to see some really big grad plus loan award amounts, and now those are just going away entirely, right? So we don't know exactly yet how that's going to land for the foreign schools, for people that are starting those programs next year. That remains to be seen, right? So if they're lucky, they'll be subject to the same new limits. If they're unlucky, then they, I'm not really sure what's going to happen there, right? Because we don't have access to the Grad Plus loans anymore. So those are some things that need to be worked out yet in the whole regulatory process, before we know exactly how those new law changes will impact those students that attend programs abroad. All right, I see some contributions here. So lower balance to charge interest on, less money for other expenses. Yeah, indeed. So this one from Aiden. So lower balance to charge interest on. So this is one of the reasons why I asked this question, right? So the way that federal student loan interest works is that your payments first have to go to the interest before it can go to the principal. And you don't get charged interest on your interest, right? You get charged interest on the principal, right? So if for my dog, right, if I were attending school these days and I had some extra money to put towards my student loans, I wouldn't make payments while I'm still borrowing. I would borrow less, right? Because if you think about your ability to make payments, right? So I am able to pay off some of the interest as I go, right? I can maybe pull some money from savings, right? If that's the case, then I should borrow less, right? Because if I have the ability or the extra cash to make payments towards the loans while I'm borrowing, that means I borrowed too much. And if I borrow less, my principal will be lower, less interest will accrue, I will have less when I graduate, a lower balance, right? So don't make payments to your loans while you're in school, borrow less, right? So if you have the ability to do so, try to borrow less. All right, so don't overlook what you can do now before you graduate. It's always easier to manage less in repayment than more, right? So we're looking for those areas where we can kick down our student loan balance at graduation. Now, the biggest component of that are the tuition and fees. And there's not a whole lot we can do about that unless we're getting some kind of scholarship or grant, or we have some robust 529 funds or some other way of, reducing that amount that's going directly to the tuition and fees. What we can play with a little bit more is the living expenses, right? And if you need the full amount, so be it, right? I mean, here was a person that commented, I'm currently making only enough income to support costs for groceries and some of my rent. The student loans are there to help you get through school, right? None of this, don't take any of this to mean that you shouldn't be using them or that you're borrowing too much. If you need to borrow what is offered to you, take it. But if you don't have a budget, it's very easy to borrow more than you actually need, right? And those are areas where then you can return those funds, right? Or borrow less so you don't accrue a whole bunch of interest on funds that you may not actually need, right? But that requires you to have a budget. So related to that, and this is, I think, our last poll of the evening, if I can find my polling window. Do federal student, and I saw that in one of the comments, I think somebody said less compound interest. Madeline said less compound interest. All right, looks like the trues are winning out. So the answer to this question is false, right? So this is one of the benefits, right? So when I say this repeatedly on a lot of the slides here, federal student loans are the most flexible but really annoying debt you're ever going to have. This is one of the things that makes them the most beneficial debt you'll ever have, is they don't compound, right? You don't get charged interest on your interest, right? That's compounding. right? You get charged interest on your principal, right? So the less you borrow, the less interest will accrue. When you accrue interest on your federal student loans, it ends up in an unpaid interest bucket, right? So if I come back to my example here of the file that I uploaded, now this person doesn't have a very high student loan balance and they just received it about a month ago, but they have $73 of unpaid interest, right? They will not get charged any additional interest on this interest, right? They get charged only interest on the principal for the loans that accrue interest during school. Right, so here, that's where the loan types are important. So the unsubsidized loans do accrue interest. That's what's going to end up with the unpaid interest. The health profession student loans do not, right? So they'll have a 0 unpaid interest, right? All the way through the first year after you graduate, which is why they're so beneficial if you can get them, right? But this will continue to accrue interest for the duration of school, right? And if we send that over to the in-school loan estimator, we can actually see how much interest that will accrue for the remaining 3+ years, right? In this case, it's $3,049, right? And when we receive that second half of that award the next semester, another $2,800 will accrue on that amount, right? So that's, but this, you don't get charged interest on this interest, right? You get charged interest on the principal only, right? So federal student loans do not compound. Okay, so in-school loan estimator, nitty-gritty stuff. Actually, you want to do a prize drawing before we torch you with numbers?
Hey, I like it.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, let's do it. All right. Let's go for another DoorDash 25. Gosh, the anticipation with how close it gets is kind of intense. Allie W. Okay. And then let's do a $20 one. That looks like Ashley W. Awesome. And then
Wow. 2 AWs.
And then let's do a $15 one. Race G. And then I'm just going to throw in a Yeti mug also. Let's do that one.
Whoa, wow.
I know. We're getting wild here,
Getting
Tony.
nuts.
Getting nuts.
Those Yeti
Already
mugs are great.
started.
Yeah.
Alex W.
Wow, a lot of W's.
Lot of W's. Okay.
All right, excellent. And I saw an excellent question in here too. Does the interest not combine with the principal after graduation and create new principal? It does not. It used to, right? That used to be an automatic thing that would happen, but they eliminated that what was called capitalization event a few years ago. So unless you consolidate your loans, that unpaid interest will never get added to the principal. And where there used to be a lot of incentive for everybody to consolidate their loans, there's less incentive now. So as long as you don't need to consolidate your loans, which most of you probably won't need to consolidate your loans, at least not your direct loans, you can keep that unpaid interest from getting added to your principal, which means it won't ever charge you additional interest on that interest that you accrued during school. So it's a great question, but it's one of those things that make your federal student loans the most beneficial debt that you'll ever have. All right, so I got
some questions in the Q&A that have been coming up about internships, residencies, and repayment during that. I know that's still a little bit of ways off. I also wanted to mention, Dr. Bartels, aren't you doing a session on internship and residency repayment a little bit later in October?
Are we? I think so. I think we're doing one with ACVIM. Yeah, that's correct. We are going to do, there's an internship residency roundtable that we're doing through VIN, where we're going to talk about finances during internship and residency training. And then it will also come up and we also do one that's focused specifically for intern residents around that time. But that is, that's a very specific thing that not really the focus of this particular session, but I will touch on it when we do talk about repayment briefly and the new repayment assistance plan, which can help cover some of that interest while you're doing that advanced training, right? So definitely, we do talk about that, not necessarily in this particular context, but we do dive in more detail for those. And that'll be something that is unfolding as that new repayment assistance plan becomes available next summer. All right, so how do we use this cost of attendance information to affect the amounts that we borrow, right? So this is what determines how much you're allowed to borrow under the existing rules. And it's what the school publishes as the cost of attendance. So I'm picking on Illinois here because Illinois students posted the most in the Borrow Better Challenge, and I'm originally from Illinois, so why not, right? So here's a non-resident Illinois cost of attendance for 2025-2026 academic year. Here's the tuition for the year. Here are the fees, right? These are things that are generally non-negotiable. Maybe the health insurance, if you're still on your parents' health insurance, you otherwise don't need it. Maybe there's a way for you to not have to borrow that. And then this additional expenses, the food, housing, books and supplies, other expenses. Generally, every school has something similar to this. They may break out the categories a little bit differently, but this is the amount that you have that's a little bit more in your control, right? So depending on what your budget is, you may need less than $20,620, right? But this is what Illinois, based on their surveying, estimates that you're going to need to cover these, non-direct expenses or indirect expenses, sometimes they're called, while you're there attending veterinary school. But this sets the total, so the 58,146, 5738, 2620, this is the 84,504. That's the maximum that you're allowed to borrow under the existing structure. And how does that work? Right, so most of you, again, you're independent from your parents when you're filling out FAFSA, when you're attending professional school. So your student aid index, as it's called, is 0 or maybe even negative, which means you're eligible for the entire financial aid award up to the cost of attendance. So that's what sets that limit. The first 20,500 for grad school is here. For health professions in the US, so back to that question about how does it differ for students who are outside of the US, you're not eligible for this additional $20,000 in direct unsubsidized loans if you attend a health program outside of the US. Any amount that you need above that falls into that Grad Plus category, so $44,004, right? So that's how they determine your loan award amounts. The $20,620 that essentially gets refunded to you to cover your living expenses. This is where you might, have a budget that says, oh, well, I don't, a year, I might only need, 15, right? And in which case you might be able to return or reduce your financial aid award by about $5,000, hopefully in those Grad Plus loans, so you don't accrue interest on that $5,000, right? So that's where you have some ability there to maybe tweak those loan award amounts that you receive. That and for some schools, the health insurance is required. Other schools will allow you to opt out of it if you're covered in some other way, right? So there's maybe an additional, $2,000 in this case, $2,200 that you might not need to borrow if you can show that you're covered under some other plan. All right, so some tips and tricks we've been kind of talking about them along the way. Budget, right? I know it's hard, especially when you don't necessarily have a lot of income or any income at all, but your student loans serve as that income, right? So if you receive student loan amounts to cover your living expenses, consider that your income, right? And when they deposit that into your account, so you can use it to cover those living expenses, separate that money from your spending account and put some of it or the bulk of it, since you're early on in the semester right now, into a savings account, right? So I'm going to hit the link there in the presentation, bankrate.com. It will show you all of the bank online banks that are offering interest rates, pick one that doesn't have a balance requirement, right? So you don't really want a $5,000 minimum balance requirement, but a 0 is pretty good, right? And if I can get 3.5% on those funds, great, right? Here's one that will give you 4% with a minimum balance of 0, right? So look for the highest yielding online savings accounts you can find, transfer a bulk of that refund into that savings account so you're earning some interest on it. It's not the same amount of interest that you're being charged, but it'll help to kind of reduce the interest impact for those student loans. And then you can set up some transfers from that savings account to your spending account, maybe monthly or every other week, to mimic kind of a paycheck, right? To cover those recurring expenses that you have while you're in school. And if you kind of have that barrier and you've got a little bit of a budget that's evolving and you're developing, you're learning what those expenses are, a couple of months into the semester, you may find that maybe I don't need all of what I took. And that's great, right? Because you still have 120 days to return amounts that you borrowed above what you need. And those amounts that you return will also return the interest and fees associated with it, right? So instead of making generic payments that would get applied across all of your loans and probably end up just hitting the interest, you can actually target specifically the loans that you received in the last 120 days, and it will act as what's called a return, right? Which means that it's going to take off directly the principal and kind of flush the interest that was associated with that amount that you returned, right? So that's one way that you can directly reduce the principal, but it also gives you some time to see how much you actually need, right? So if you can stash away some money in a savings account and return a chunk of it before that 120-day window, you can pocket the interest that you earned on that money, right? So those are some ways that you can, try to use that time frame and the rules to allow you to see how much you actually need and maybe have an opportunity to return those funds before that window expires.
Tony, do you just want to mention that we did hear from, at least one student that they were told that they had less time?
Yeah, I'm not really sure what that had any, what that meant. Federal student loans have a 120-day return window. They're direct loans, all of them do, right? So sometimes you might get some conflicting information from your financial aid office, but push them harder, right? This is where you may have to do some educating of them, but you have 120 days to return those funds, and it will return the interest and fees associated with the amount that you returned. And 120 days is a long time, right? So if you received your first loan in mid-August, you have nearly to the holiday break to figure that out, right? So if you're working on your budget, maybe check in on it over Thanksgiving, see how much money is sitting in that savings account. If it's more than you think you need to get through the rest of the semester until you receive your next set of loans, then return some of those funds so you can return the interest and fees associated with it as well. You can also use it to build an emergency fund, right? So if you don't have an emergency fund, or I saw some people like this person, I didn't account for certain issues to arise during my time in school. That sounds like an emergency to me, right? Emergencies happen even while you're a student. You don't want to have to put those expenses on a credit card where it might be charging you 20+%. Use your student loans, right? They're still the most flexible debt you're ever going to have, right? So if you want to stash away or keep $1,000, $1,500 in that savings account just in case something happens, that's fine, right? So don't feel like you have to do penny to penny here, but I do see some students who, for whatever reason, they're either really good at budgeting, really frugal, they've got 4 roommates, whatever the case is, they don't need that full amount that the school gives them, and they're sitting on $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 extra when they reach the end of the semester, and then they get another additional amount to cover their next semester, and now they're being charged interest on money they really didn't need, right? So be smart with it, right? You can use it to cover externship, interviews, post-graduation moving expenses, set yourself up for that apartment that you might need to get. A lot of time apartments won't let you put that deposit on a credit card, right? So you're going to actually need some cash. Your student loans are great for that, right? So you can use them for things like that, but if you do find that you have more than you may actually need, then return them, and you'll return that interest and fees with it as well. All right. Cool. How are we doing on prizes? Do we want to do some more?
I think we always want to do more prizes.
All right, great.
Okay, let me share that. Okay, let's go for another DoorDash gift card, $25. Oh, the suspense. Camilla S. All right. And do you want to leave some prizes after this, or just do it all?
Yeah, let's
do it.
let's leave a couple here.
Okay.
I'm gonna turn my video off just because I'm getting some internet unstable connection errors. So
Okay, we have 3 more. You want to save those?
yeah, let's save those. We're getting pretty close to the end here though. So
Right.
so top borrowing mistakes, using loans other than federal student loans to pay for veterinary school. This is going to change, right? Again, the borrowing rules that are going to affect people that are starting next year, or those of you that are going to take your first loan next year, are pretty significant, right? So if you can avoid having to seek out private student loan funding to get through veterinary school, then do it, right? Because that's going to significantly complicate things for your future colleagues. And you have a way to do that, right? If you apply for FAFSA and receive a federal loan before July 1st of 2026, then you should be grandfathered into the existing rules to get you through veterinary school. Try not to pay interest on student loans, right? Borrow less. I generally, the person too that said they had an amount in savings to help cover some of the interest or their loans. The way I approach savings is that if you're going to wipe out your savings to avoid student loans, then don't do it, right? Those savings are really valuable, right? So it's going to help you get from veterinary school to whatever you're doing after veterinary school, and until you get to that first paycheck that you're earning as a veterinarian and you start actually getting a return on this investment that is this education, right? You don't need to eliminate your savings just to avoid student loans. Your student loans are very flexible, particularly as you're just getting started in repayment. There's no need to empty the bank account just to avoid student debt. Now, if you have enough savings or enough assets on hand to cover a significant chunk of your veterinary education or all of it and still have some savings when you get out of school, then great, right? But generally speaking, that's not a very common scenario, right? So if it's great to have said that I did all this work before I got to school so I could use some of my savings to not take on student loans. If it's going to wipe out your savings, then don't do that, right? I mean, your student loans are still available to you and easy enough to manage after you graduate that it's not worth wiping out your savings to avoid them. That's where those 529 funds come in. If you have access to some of those, that would be great, right? Those are not terribly common, but I do see them pop up, not infrequently as well. So those are great uses to avoid student loans if you can. Making payments on undergrad loans or using your vet school loans to pay your undergraduate loans. Undergraduate loans are much less expensive, right? The interest rates are lower and sometimes they're even subsidized. So if you're borrowing more expensive veterinary school loans, leave those less expensive loans alone, right? So, sometimes the temptation is, well, they're a smaller amount. I can get them to zero faster. I'm just going to get rid of them. Well, you're not actually saving yourself money doing that, right? So, reduce the amount that you're borrowing in the vet school loans and leave those undergrad loans alone. Not having a budget, most of you don't, right? And that's okay, right? But you've got some time, and those of you that will, it'll be a heck of a lot easier to get through school financially and then also establish those financial habits after graduation. So try to figure out a way to work that budget into your, at least your monthly process. Borrowing more than you need, not returning those funds, and then not asking questions, right? So we've got a lot of resources to help you work through all of this. Post on the student debt message board area, and we're happy to help. These were some other questions that I saw come in that I thought were particularly tough, right? They come up a lot. I wanted to put them up here just because I'm guessing that more than this one person here is probably thinking it, so we can bring them out into the open. This is a really good one, right? Do you believe colleges will stop raising tuition now that there's a cap on student loans? I think that's the hope. I'm pretty sure that's the reason for the cap on the new borrowing changes. Whether or not that will happen remains to be seen, right? So as long as applicants continue to apply for and accept those most expensive seats, there is no reason, there's no incentive for that school to reduce their costs. Right now, it's going to be more complicated for those people to pay for those seats. And if they can't pay for them and they ultimately end up going unfilled, then maybe we'll see those costs come down. But that's again, remains to be seen. So, you can help yourself there or encourage the people behind you to, especially with the new caps on borrowing at the federal level, to try to avoid those more expensive seats and try to stay within the borrowing limits, because those federal student loans are going to be much more easy to manage and repayment than a combination of federal and private loans will be. How fast can I pay these off, and should I refinance? Well, that's a tough question, right? It really depends on how much we're talking about that you borrowed or how much you're going to have at graduation, right? So that's why we have the in-school loan estimator. What is that balance? And then what is my income? Right? Because it really doesn't matter what the debt number is if we don't know what the income number is, right? So if you've got, $100,000 of student loans, which is relatively low for a veterinarian, but you're doing a $50,000 internship, right? Your debt to income ratio is 2, and that's not great for paying your loans back fast, right? So you're probably going to benefit from an income-driven plan. If you've got, $100,000 of debt and you're earning $150,000 after you graduate, well, we can talk about how fast you can pay off your student loans, right? But it really depends on what the number is for your student loans at graduation versus what is the income, right? So what is that debt to income ratio? And if your debt to income ratio is greater than 1, paying your loans back, quote, fast probably shouldn't be part of your strategy, right? It's going to be very difficult, right? The more, the higher your balance, the higher you're going to have to pay, depending on how fast is fast for you. So the first thing is defining fast. How many years is that, right? For some, 5 years is fast. For others, 15 years is fast, right? But, those are going to have very different monthly payment requirements depending on how you define fast and what your student loan balance is. So I generally don't mess around with the fast thing. I'd prefer to just let the income make the decision for me. As your income increases, the payments will increase, and you'll either pay the balance to 0 or you'll hit forgiveness, right? I don't really have to worry about how fast is fast. I can just let my income make that determination for me. I would never recommend refinancing federal student loans. But your federal student loans are the most beneficial debt you're ever going to have. Any private loan is going to be less beneficial than your federal student loans. So if you refinance your federal student loan with a private loan, you're going to end up making your debt less flexible. And as long as your income is very robust and your debt to income ratio is less than 1, that won't matter, right? But if something happens, it will matter, right? And you really don't want to put yourself in that position. It's completely avoidable. So I don't recommend refinancing federal student loans with any kind of private loan. Some of these other ones, dedicating 10 years to 501c3, the best option to pay off student debt. It's certainly one of the fastest and cheapest. So public service loan forgiveness is one of those benefits that's available to your federal student loans only, those direct loans. So if your career is taking you in a nonprofit direction, right? So maybe you want to work in academia, maybe a shelter, zoo, aquarium, state veterinarian, military veterinarian, all of those things would be public service loan forgiveness eligible. You make payments based on your income for 10 years using an income-driven plan, and anything that's remaining at the end of that 10 years is forgiven and you don't have to pay a tax on it. So when people do ask, what's the fastest, cheapest way to get out of student debt? Public service loan forgiveness is the answer in many of those cases. So if you're kind of wired for nonprofit work or your career is taking you there anyway, then get familiar with public service loan forgiveness. The paying it off, living off your partner's income and paying off your loans ASAP, I'm not a fan, right? Doesn't mean you can't do it, and it doesn't mean that people haven't successfully done it, but I wouldn't recommend it, right? Again, if it was my dog, I'd make payments based on my income. I'll either pay the balance to zero or I'll hit forgiveness. I don't want to sacrifice my financial wellness. I don't want to sacrifice my partner's financial wellness just to eliminate my student debt more quickly, right? Your student debt's not going to prevent you from doing anything, but not having any available cash will, right? And these types of things generally put people in a cash poor scenario, which can make things more difficult, right? So I'm not a huge fan of those aggressive repayment strategies. I mean, doesn't mean you can't do them, and they can work in certain scenarios, but I'm not generally a big fan of those. So this is kind of related, right? Start investing right out of school or pay off loans as fast as possible. It's not an either or thing. It's a both and, right? This is one of the reasons why I don't like this strategy, is because I want to start investing and taking advantage of retirement plans, HSAs, FSAs, other types of investments as soon as I have income, right? If I put an artificial constraint on myself that says, I can't do this until I get rid of my student loans, then I'm going to put myself behind. And sometimes that could be more than 2 years, 5 years. It could be 10, 15, 20 years, right? And it's just not a good idea, right? So ideally you want to do both, and you can do both. If you're using one of those income-driven plans, your payment will be a reasonable amount based on your income, which means you can invest as well as manage your student loans, right? And you want to be able to do both simultaneously. And that's also what helps you enjoy life outside of work. All right, so let's touch on repayment. So here's kind of this basic, and some of this is still evolving, but here's what we know, right? Income-driven repayment is still going to be a thing. For those of you that receive a loan after July 1st of 2026, so this is going to apply to anybody that's not graduating in 2026, you're going to be limited to the repayment assistance plan. Your monthly payment is a percentage of your income. There's a $10 minimum, right? No matter what your income is, even if it's zero or negative, you will still have to make at least a $10 payment. And it can be a maximum of 10% of your adjusted gross income, which is essentially your taxable income. So adjusted gross income is a number they can pull right off of your tax return when you start filing a tax return. That's what's going to determine your minimum monthly payment. Now, we can also use that to our advantage. So coming back to that question somebody asked about doing an internship or residency after school, if I file a tax return before I graduate, right, my adjusted gross income is going to be a very low number, maybe even zero, probably negative, right? In which case I can guarantee myself a $10 minimum monthly payment. And the nicest thing about RAP is that no interest will accrue, right? So coming back to that misconception about student loans compound, right? RAP has a very beneficial 100% unpaid interest subsidy, which means if my payment is less than the monthly interest that accrues, the government covers the rest. Right? Just like SAVE before it, RAP has the same 100% unpaid interest subsidy, which means your balance will not grow. In fact, RAP offers a principal credit. So in the scenarios where you're not making a payment that covers at least your interest, the government will make a credit towards your principal up to $50 per month. So they will directly reduce the principal by $50 per month. So while you're doing, you extend this now into an internship scenario where maybe I'm earning 40 grand a year, but I filed a tax return before I graduated, so my AGI showed zero. So I apply for RAP after my grace period ends and I'm in my internship. I have a minimum monthly payment of $10 per month. My balance is not growing, and the government's giving me a $10 to $50 credit towards my principal each month. Right, so my balance will actually decrease while I'm not actually making any payments. right? So in that respect, RAP is going to be very helpful. The problem with RAP is that you don't receive forgiveness until you hit 30 years of payments. That means that most of you probably won't reach forgiveness. Some of you probably still will, right? Depending on your balance and what you choose to do after graduation. But forgiveness may not happen the longer you're in repayment, right? So that'll be something we'll have to test a little bit more when we start to see those balances. But here are some examples of the minimum monthly payments for RAP, right? So let's say you've got an internship salary at 35 grand a year, your monthly payment is $88, right? If you're earning 140 grand a year, your payment's $1,200 essentially, right? Now, alternatively, you could use a standard plan, and anybody that has a balance above $100,000, which is going to be most veterinarians, their timeline is going to be set at 25 years on the standard plan, right? But if I start comparing, right, what is my payment based on my student loans on a 25-year plan, right? I mean, if I've got $300,000 of student loans on a 25-year plan, my minimum monthly payment is $2,300 a month, right? $2,300 a month is not even on this table for RAP, right? So I have to be earning more than $200,000 a year to trigger a $2,300 a month payment. So I'm probably not going to use the standard plan, right? I can pay less here and I get forgiveness credit in case I need it, right? The standard plan is not going to provide me any forgiveness credit, and I'm probably going to have a higher monthly payment, right? So the standard plans are generally not that beneficial, right? The income-driven plans, in this case, RAP, while you do have 30 years to reach forgiveness, I'd rather have that forgiveness credit and a payment that's based on my income than using the standard 25-year plan. So that's kind of just a really quick and dirty what repayment is probably going to look like. We're going to see more information become available as RAP comes online. RAP isn't due to start until July 1st of 2026, right? So it may be one of those things that we'll start playing with for the new grads or the 2027 grads. It's just going to depend on the circumstance. So the secret to student loan repayment, it's always easier to manage less than more. You're going to pay your balance to zero one way or another. Make payments based on your income. You'll either reach forgiveness or you'll reach a zero balance. Either pathway is fine, right? But if you're going to hit forgiveness, then you want to be prepared for it, right? And that's where saving for that tax can be helpful. But since most of you, if you were to reach a tax on forgiveness, won't reach it until 30 years, you have even longer to plan for it, which makes that easier to hit that target. Keep as much of your balance in the federal student system as you possibly can. Borrow only what you need. Pay what your income requires, right? And don't sacrifice other more critical elements of your overall financial wellness just to either avoid student loans or to pay them off faster than your income allows, right? Those are the things that will allow you to, kind of walk and chew gum essentially at the same time. You'll be able to manage your student loans as well as have a robust financial plan simultaneously, no matter what you're doing after graduation. All right, any other questions? And then let's go ahead and do the remaining prize drawings.
There were some great questions about returning student loan amounts. When do you see that has been made? Do you double check that on the studentaid.gov site or with your loan servicer?
Absolutely. So I would, you could check your loan servicer account immediately, but you probably won't see it show up on your student aid file for maybe 30 days, right? So your loan servicer account is kind of that real-time accounting of your student loan balance. Your student aid data file gets updated at least monthly or when something major happens. So either when you receive a loan or maybe if you did a return, you might see that update relatively quickly. But while it's worth checking, it may not be instantaneous, right? So if you do a return tomorrow, right, you might need to wait until either the end of this month at the latest or a couple of days before you see that reflected in your student aid account. But if you check your student aid account, you'll actually see it processed as a canceled amount as opposed to a payment. So that's one of the ways that you can see if it was processed correctly. But if you direct it as a payment to a loan that you received within the last 120 days, it should be treated as a quote cancellation or a return, which will return those interest and fees associated with it. It's a good question.
And then a couple of repayment related questions. When you make payments on your loans after graduation, does that payment still get applied to the interest first and then only go to the principal after you've covered the interest?
Correct. So that's kind of, yeah, that's the latter. So unfortunately, if you have a high unpaid interest balance, let me see if I have so here, let's play with this one here. So if I send this over to the loan repayment simulator, payments first have to go to interest, right? So by the time this person's grace period ends, they will have $256,000 of principal. That's the amount that will generate the interest, but they already additionally have a $42,000 unpaid interest balance, right? So let's give them a $150,000 income. Let's assume they're not doing an internship. Let's assume they pay their tax or they filed their tax return like we suggested. And we are starting to wrap into the simulator right now. This is a bit of a draft, right? So we're working on this, but it will get you kind of a ballpark estimate. So in this case, we've got our $10 minimum monthly payment, right? And that $10 will first go to cover the interest that generates per month, right? But because it's not going to cover all of it, you're going to get a credit towards your principal of $10 on your principal. So you'll actually accrue a slightly less amount of interest the following month, right? But you're not going to end up hitting this principal until this unpaid interest balance is gone, right? And that's not going to happen until, if we come over here, we start to have a payment that is higher than the interest that accrues each month, right? Because your payments first go towards the interest. And once that payment covers all of the interest that was generated that month, and if there's anything left, then it'll start to pay down that unpaid interest and then eventually hit the principal. This is also why I think I saw somebody else ask a question about why doesn't it make sense to pay more than the minimum? Because you're probably not to a point where you can easily get past the monthly amount that is required to cover the interest to then hit the principal, right? So this is where, again, we'll talk more about this when we get to the repayment focused ones. I'm going to let my income determine when that right time is. Otherwise, you're going to drive yourself nuts throwing random amounts of money towards your student loans and not actually seeing the principal balance disappear. And that money is probably better spent elsewhere, right? Better, used towards boosting your 401k or saving for the down payment on a home or working towards the down payment on buying into a practice or starting your own, right? Those are going to generate higher overall wealth building returns for you than making extra payments towards the student loans, particularly when they put these kind of unpaid interest subsidies into the repayment options, right? You don't want to start fighting against those unpaid interest subsidies. Just take it. And then once your income is high enough to then start covering that interest naturally, then you'll start to see that balance decrease. And then you'll either hit a zero or you'll hit forgiveness, right? It just depends on what your balance is and what your income is and when that crossover occurs. In this case, we don't hit forgiveness, right? We end up paying the balance to zero in about 20 years, right? So not terrible. The effective annual interest rate on that because of the unpaid interest subsidy is 2.885%. Right? This is another reason why I'm not terribly concerned with how quickly I pay back my student loans. I can generally get higher than a 2.8% return just about anywhere I would choose to put that money I might be tempted to pay extra towards my student loans, which is why it doesn't make sense to do that.
There was a question about saving for forgiveness. Would you, while you're there, just go ahead and show that forgiveness planning module?
Yeah, sure. So if you are projected to reach forgiveness, so let's say, maybe you're a 2026 grad and you're able to use the new version of IBR, right? In that case, you would be projected to reach forgiveness. right? So here we're, anticipating $106,000 tax. I need to get to that in 20 years. That means I would need to save $290, earn a 4% return on that. It would cost me about $70,000 to hit that $106,000. It would also reduce the total amount I paid. It still ends up being very similar to what we're projecting in RAP here. So, you could use the forgiveness planning module if you're projected to reach forgiveness. We also have a planning blog here that talks about how you can invest to increase your return on that long-term forgiveness planning fund. Anything that you can earn, above that, savings account rate will decrease the cost of your total student loans. So, but everybody always wants to jump on top of this, but for most of you, again, the first year veterinary students, you've got a long way before you get to anything that resembles student loan forgiveness. So I wouldn't worry about that too much just yet, but those resources are out there. If you're really eager to see what that looks like.
And then one more, and I'll let you draw some prizes. If I refinanced, is there a way to make it go back to, I think they mean federal student loans?
No, that's one of the reasons why you don't want to do that, right? If you pay your federal student loans off with a private student loan, there is no return, right? There is no going back to that. That's an undoable action, right? So don't do it, right? I would just, please don't do that, right? So you can refinance less beneficial private loans, right? We're going to see a lot of that for the colleagues behind you, right? Because the folks that hit the borrowing limits, right, they're going to hit $50,000 and they're going to need another some amount to get through veterinary school that they're going to fund through private loans. Maybe some of those private loans are not going to be terribly beneficial when they get out and they're earning income, depending on what they're doing. They may be a candidate to refinance that private loan component, but I would not be eager to refinance any kind of federal student loans with a private loan. Right? You're just going to make your loan portfolio more risky.
All right, I think we've got a couple more prizes to do.
All right, let's do that.
Okay, let's do it. All right, DoorDash $20 gift card. Danielle D. Okay, and then we will do the DoorDash $15, the last DoorDash gift card, $15. I'm gonna hope that's Anaya, B. And then the last one we will do is the Rumple blanket.
Cool.
I happen to be a big fan of these.
I just used mine on my camping trip I was on.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
They're great. And they're so great for the dogs because you can just wash them too. Caitlin. All right, there we go. Tony, you want to ask about that fish? I'm curious what kind of fish that is.
Yeah, well, before I do that, I saw a question from Brittany about, using RAP and saving money for her toddler in a 529 account. I mean, that's kind of what I'm doing, right? So I've got a toddler and I'm not currently making payments to my student loans and I'm boosting that 529 account, right? So absolutely, right? Those are tax advantage plans. They grow tax free. They can be used without paying taxes on those for those specified education funds. Those are absolutely great things to do, right? So if I had a choice between, or like you suggested, using RAP and making payments based on my income and then focusing on my toddler's 529 account, I'm definitely going to do that and not play that station to station game where it's like, oh, I got to eliminate my student loans before I can fund this 529 account. I really need to figure out a way to do both simultaneously. So yeah, this is a cut bow in the Blue River here in Colorado where I live. So and this one is a picture from the Gunnison Gorge down the Gunnison River, and the top one is on the Teton River in Idaho. So a lot of fun to be had out west here. Another reason why not to focus too much on your student loans.
Well, it looks like we don't have any other questions right now.
All right. Great. Thanks everyone. That was some excellent questions. And thanks again to those of you that participated in the Borrow Better Challenge. And if any other questions come up while you're borrowing or when you're trying to do those returns or even your budgeting during school, feel free to post those on the message boards. You can post anonymously there and we're happy to help you along the way.
And thank you to SAVMA and VBMA for helping us to promote this webinar and just kind of get this content out there. I know there's so much confusion and that is definitely anxiety inducing. So I think it's really important just to have this information out there and have these conversations.
I kind of want to
Absolutely.
just echo what Dr. Mears said. Thank you so much to everyone at VIN, especially Dr. Bartels, Dr. Mears, and Jordan. I know Steve has been behind the scenes too, emailing with me. So thank you guys so much for taking your time to chat with our students.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone.
Have a good night.
Thank you guys.